Yes, good morning.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear us?
Good morning, Liliana.
Very good. Over to you, Sasha, to start.
Can the people hear? Good morning, everyone. I would really like to welcome everyone to this session on where to start first, identifying the leverage points for effective capacity development. I'm delighted to be back with so many people at the World Data Forum here in Bern. I know this is going to be a great session because today I put this suit on for the first time in a year and a half and I found 20 euros in my pocket. So I think that's a good omen. That's a sign of good luck. Thanks, of course, to all the people who are joining us online. It's wonderful to have you with us. My name is Sasha Ramirez-Hughes. I'm the Communications and Partnerships Manager at the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, Paris 21. We have a fascinating group of speakers for you today, and I'm eager to hand you over to them for an interesting discussion. But first, if you'll indulge me, I just want to share with you a couple of grains of thought. Now, capacity development is something very close to Paris 21's heart. It's something we've been working on for more than 20 years. To start thinking about the issue today, let's look at one specific case. Let's look at the effect of COVID-19 on national statistical systems and on national statistical organizations. Now, as we all know, the pandemic forced severe operational constraints on many NSOs. They were forced to produce much more data on a very short time scale with a high degree of localization and accuracy. And this placed severe burden on many NSOs. At the same time, of course, we saw huge innovation. We saw public-private partnerships with telecoms industry. We saw many other examples of adapting to this change and innovating in the face of crisis. But of course, not all countries fared the same. We saw there was huge unevenness. Now, there are many factors that are related to this. Some are internal, some are external. But of course, part of this conversation is capacity. When I mean capacity to navigate the data revolution. I mean capacity to partner with the private sector to deal with operational challenges. And here's another part of the story. Many of the most intractable problems that we face today are ones that are cross-cutting. Look at climate change, look at COVID-19, or look at gender data gaps for that matter. I was in a fascinating session yesterday, and this was really one of the main themes, that gender data gaps, gender equality are cross-cutting issues. They have many different facets. You cannot deal with them solely by looking at gender data, whatever that means. You have to look at many different areas. You have to look at agricultural data. You have to look at employment, labor, many of these things, healthcare, of course. So if NSS actors want to play a meaningful role in this new ecosystem, they need to learn how to think laterally. They need to learn how to navigate partnerships and how to solve complex challenges. Now, of course, technical innovation is only one part of this conversation. Capacity development has many facets, ranging from leadership, communications, change management. This is precisely why Paris 21, together with our partners, developed the Capacity Development 4.0 framework. These are the first guidelines to advise NSOs and others on how to engage in a holistic, country-led statistical capacity development exercise. For this reason, I'm delighted to welcome our colleague from the NSO of Malawi, who will discuss the organizational capacities needed for NSOs to thrive. And of course, we are in the midst of a data revolution. It's imperative that NSOs are able to engage with new actors in the data ecosystem. In this respect, I'm delighted to hear from our colleague at World Data Lab, who will provide his insights into how we can turn NSOs into data stewards and strengthen trust in official data. But of course, I've been talking a lot about the NSO, and the NSO is only one part of the NSS. And of course, production of statistics is only one part of the data value chain. Furthermore, how we measure statistical capacity is also a crucial question, and one that has evolved significantly in recent years through initiatives by the World Bank, Paris 21, and others. For this reason, I'm excited to hear from the World Bank today, who will tell us about the role of the Statistical Performance Index, which looks at data use, data of services, products, sources, and data infrastructure, and also looks at the exciting new topics of geospatial data and administrative data. These are crucial to the current conversation. My colleague Julia from Paris 21 will also look at the issue of statistical capacity indicators. She'll seek to unpack the ways that SCIs can prepare NSS actors to face new data challenges. Finally, we need to remember that this isn't a problem that will be solved overnight. We need long-term planning, long-term engagement. And here, the question of incentives is crucial. We need to find the right incentives, the right mechanisms to engage the various parts of the NSS in adapting together. This isn't necessarily easy, and there's no one-size-all-fits solution. But today, at least, we're lucky to get some nuggets of wisdom from the Millennium Challenge Corporation on these important topics. So I think I've taken enough of your time, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with the scale or the scope of the challenges. But this basically boils down to two questions in terms of capacity development. We know we have to change, but how? And once we know how do we actually bring that change about? With this, let me hand you over to my colleagues Liliana and Philippe from Paris 21, who will take us through this exciting session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for setting the scene for us. My name is Liana Suchodolska. I'm a policy analyst at Paris 21. And I'm delighted to moderate the session together with my colleague Philippe from Paris 21 as well. I am very pleased to have with us Mrs. Mercy Kanyuka, Statistics Commissioner of the National Statistical Office in Malawi. Mercy, thank you very much for joining us from Zomba in Malawi today. You have been leading the National Statistical Office in your capacity for more than 7 years. When you just overtook the leadership of the NSO, you saw the arrival of the 2030 agenda with its great data demand. And throughout these years, and especially most recently, you've seen the new challenges, but also new opportunities that are being put in front of your office. So given your vast experience, can you tell us what are the strategic priorities for the capacity development of your office to be able to survive and thrive in the new era? Mercy, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share the Malawi experience and share with this very important forum. Let me mention from the onset that Malawi National Statistical Office is still a government department under the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development, although the position of the Commission of Statistics was elevated to that of the Principal Secretary level. We are in the process of moving towards semi-autonomous status, but that process has just started. There's a need to improve capacity. So I'll talk about the individual capacities first, and then I'll talk about the capacities of the National Statistical Office as a whole, organizational capacities. When you look at individual capacities, there's need to develop technical capacity in the individuals, the technicians, knowledge of statistical applications, data analysis, geospatial data, and big data analysis. That capacity has to be built. We need to build these capacities not only in NSO, but across the NSS, the National Statistical System. We need, obviously, soft skills, management and leadership skills. These tend to lack in statisticians. These are just statisticians, and they are promoted to become managers, and they need also to not only manage the internally, but also have to engage with the stakeholders. And that has to be built in officers, including the data producer user engagements. But looking at the statistical, the organizational capacities, for timely and quality statistics across the NSS, there's a need to NSS. First, we need the coordination to be able to coordinate efficiently the national statistical system. So you need that coordination to build capacity within the NSO to be able to coordinate the NSS, be able to impart that knowledge, be able to even build capacity, not only concentrating at NSO, but also looking forward to the other NSS. Because I remember that when we had a midterm review of our strategic plan, it actually indicated there was a lot of capacity within NSO, but not so much in the NSS. So other ministries and departments were not as up to the standard of the NSO. In this era of to this age of very swift technological advancement, we need to modernize the National Statistical Office, the National Statistical System. The statistical environment has to be upgraded. We need infrastructure development. We need to embrace new technology in this very, very crucial age of swift technological advancement, which is actually rendering the traditional ways of data collection obsolete. NSOs, including Malawi NSO, has to jack up in the area of in this area to make full use of the upcoming technologies, which have a great potential for improving efficiency, reliability, and timeliness of statistics. We need the internet. We need connectivity. We need websites, up and running and updated websites. Online data collection infrastructure are very important and absolutely a must to have now. Obviously, we cannot do all this without sufficient funding for implementing statistical activities. So we need to increase local funding, especially now that there is a declining external funding. So although we want to mobilize resources from outside, but we still have to see how we can mobilize resources internally. And we cannot develop programs without a good and solid resource mobilization strategy. So we need our governments to be encouraged to prioritize statistics among many competing needs. So that we need to build that capacity within the NSO to see how we can develop good resource mobilization strategies. Obviously, training, infrastructure development, and so on. So all that is needed. Finally, I think let me just talk about the financial management. We need important financial management so that the resources which we have, the few resources which we have, can prudently be managed. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mercy, for highlighting the role of local funding actually to strengthen the infrastructure, but also thanks for raising the point of the human skills and technical skills development of staff, and for actually pointing that it's not only the NSO that needs to be strengthened, but also the other institutions of the national statistical system. Let me now turn to our next speaker, Mr. Stefan Perhost, who is co-founder and Chief Research and Development Officer of the Governance Lab of New York University. Hello, Stefan. Based on your long research, what are the capacities of the national statistical system to be able to navigate the changing data ecosystem? The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Liliana, and pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. And I apologize for not being there in person. Wished I could join Johannes and a colleague there on the stage. And also try out my suit. I mean, it has also been quite a while since I actually had my best shoes on. Now, what I will try to focus on is indeed what is the capacity needed to really leverage today's data age, by which we specifically mean how can official statistics start using privately held data in a more systematic, sustainable, and responsible way. And that's a topic, obviously, that is front of mind of many statistical agencies as they are modernizing, because of the realization that obviously a lot of the data needed in order to make statistics more real-time or agile or improve the quality overall requires a new kind of partnership model that really engages with other data holders in society, including privately held. And this is a topic also that, of course, together with Johannes and others, I've written a report many years ago at Paris 21 that really started to focus on how do we leverage privately held data for official statistics. Now, the big realization in order to leverage privately held data is that obviously you need a technical infrastructure, you need a governance infrastructure, but more importantly, you actually do need a human infrastructure within the official statistics system, but also among the data holders in which you want to engage. And that's what we call data stewards. Now, we call it data stewards, and we call it reimagining, we call it data stewards because we do believe that we need a new kind of function and roles. And this is obviously not a single individual, but a set of function and roles that really focuses on enabling the reuse of data for public benefit, and in this case, of course, official statistics, in a more systematic, sustainable, and responsible way. Because the challenge has been that many of the efforts have been one-offs or pilots, and so how do we actually make this a more systematic effort? Many efforts also don't really have a sustainability strategy attached to it. So how do we actually make sure that there is a business case and a sustainability case in the way we start leveraging privately held data or other data sets? And then obviously responsible, making sure that no harm is done, but also responsible in the sense that we make sure that we don't have any missed opportunities as it relates to accessing privately held data. And so from our point of view, there's a new function that is needed, which we call data stewards. Now, obviously, data stewards is a term already used in some communities, such as within the scientific and library context, which is mainly about integrity of the data, which is an important topic, or within corporate data governance, where data stewards quite often is focused on the security. What we are advocating for is that we need to reimagine data stewards, a more holistic approach to actually the reuse of data, and that's what I will talk about today. It also requires reimagining data responsibility, because it's not only about protecting data, it's really about enabling an environment where we can start collaborating with other data holders in order to extract insight that can serve the public and the public interest. It also means that we need to go beyond just protecting and collaborating, but also starting to focus on how do we actually turn data intelligence in decision intelligence. So the responsibility is to collaborate, protect, and act, and that's really where data stewardship actually sits at the middle of those new kinds of data responsibilities that we are seeing. Now, in our research and in our work with data stewards in practice, we have identified like 5 clusters of competencies and capacities that need to be nurtured. Some of them are already there. Of course, we don't start from scratch, but some of them really need a more deliberate focus and actually anyway, a dedicated kind of training in order to really establish those. And I'm going to quickly go, in the 5 minutes I have here, quickly go through some of those clusters. And the first cluster, which is the obvious cluster, which is really about data steward, is really about stewarding data assets for and in the public interest. And that means a capacity to really start thinking about what are the questions that matter in my society that I need privately held data for. It also means scoping a data initiative. Turns out scoping a data initiative or an innovation is not that easy, because you really need to start thinking about what is the minimally viable data set that I need, and how do I then ultimately get it? And then obviously, it's really about structuring a fit for purpose data collaborative, which includes, of course, a technical, but also a governance and also data sharing agreements, for instance, in order to make sure that access to data is sustained over a longer period of time. Second cluster is really, and this was already mentioned by the previous speaker, it's really about partnership. So it's stewarding not only data assets, it's stewarding relationships, because this is really about vetting and engaging with data holders to access data that you otherwise would not have. It's also about user-driven design. And more importantly, it's also about engaging with the community to actually establish a social license for the reuse of data. And so that's the cluster of partnership and community engagement. The third cluster is really about sustainability. How do we actually institutionalize data innovation within the statistical office, but also how do you develop the business case, and how do you measure whether actually value has been generated? And so that's a third cluster that needs to be added to the previous 2. And then we ultimately also need to disseminate and communicate. And this is really about not only stewarding data assets or stewarding relationship, it's also about stewarding insights, and how do we make sure that actually the insights generated make a difference in society. I forgot one cluster because I was trying to rush in the issue, and this is also about internal relationships, which is the 5th cluster that needs to be established, is how do you stewarding internal resources, expertise and authority, so that you have an understanding on, for those kinds of data sets, I need those kinds of internal expertise, and that is what we typically call data ops. How do we actually develop data operations within the organization? Now, this obviously takes place across the data lifecycle. So we see data stewardship as a responsibility that is end-to-end, right? And ultimately, it requires also a dedicated training. And that's where we at GovLab have established this executive course. And some of the participants that might be in Bern might already have been part of the executive course. But we obviously need a lot more of that in order to strengthen data stewardship across those 5 clusters in a way that makes access to privately held data and other data sets more systematic, sustainable, and responsible. And that's really where we need that kind of new profession or new kind of competencies in order to do so. With that, over to you, Liliana.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for raising all these very interesting points. Let me now turn to my colleague, Philippe Gaffici from Paris 21 to ask the following questions. Philippe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liliana. It's a pleasure to invite the next speaker, Mr. Umar Serajude from the World Bank. Umar leads the World Bank Open Data Initiative and oversees the management of the World Development Indicators. Umar, thank you very much for joining us. It's very early in the morning. You are joining from Washington, DC, I believe. So thank you very much for joining us. I will just go straight to the question. Umar, the World Bank has recently published the 2021 World Development Report, and the report made use of the statistics performance indicators. What is the approach of the statistics performance indicators framework to measure the performance of the NSS based on what has been already described as capacity needs by the previous speakers? You have 5 minutes, Omar. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I just have a few slides just to explain it. Thank you very much, Philip, for inviting me. Thank you, Liliana. It's a really great pleasure to be here. I also wish I were on the stage, and hopefully sometime soon. So before me, Mercy and Stefan kind of carefully laid out the needs and the aspects of statistical capacity that we need to focus on. I'll focus a bit on the measurement part of it, how we developed a new approach of measuring it. And this statistical performance indicators is a tool for countries and development partners to assess the statistical performance, assess statistical systems, and help identify areas for improvement. The World Bank developed a statistical capacity index since 2004, and the statistical performance indicators replaces that. Now, this is a framework where we were forward-looking. Hopefully, it'll stand the test of time till 2030 and beyond. It measures less advanced systems and more advanced systems, the entire universe. It covers the entire national statistical system. And we also built it on an approach of open data, open code. So all the data points that we have are contestable. You can go see where we got it from and how the code is there to see how we constructed the indicators. And the aim of all these, all this work is to give countries incentives to build modern statistical systems. Now, the SPI, it builds on the data virtuous circle concepts promoted by Paris 21, OECD, Open Data Watch. And so it is organized into 5 pillars and 22 dimensions. I'll just walk you through those in this slide. So data has no value unless it is used. So data use is the first pillar of the SPI. And the components of this pillar is data used by legislature, executive, civil society, academia, and international bodies. And an example of it would be, does a country produce debt statistics or statistics on access to safe water that can be used by international organizations? Now, to meet the needs of users, the statistical system has to develop services that connect data users with producers. So data services that are trusted by users, such as the quality of data releases, the openness of access, are the second pillar of the statistical performance indicators. An example of this is measured using the Open Data Openness Score by ODIN, which is based on whether or not data are available online in a format that is machine readable, non-proprietary, and downloadable. Now, the strength of the interaction between data users and producers drives what data a country produces. This is the third pillar of the SPI framework. And here we focus on whether countries can produce statistics for measuring the SDGs. Measures of this was, does a country have access, have data on how many people are unemployed, or how many of them have bank accounts, and so on. Now, you can't create all this data from thin air. And I think this point is lost on no one, and that's why countries and donors' attention has gone into data sources. And in the SPI, we assess data sources not only from the statistical offices such as census, surveys, administrative data, geospatial data, but also private sector and citizen-generated data. Finally, to deliver on data use, data services and data products and data sources, you need to have a sound data infrastructure, both hard and soft. So you need legislation and governance, you need standards and methods. You definitely need a skilled workforce, as Mercy stressed earlier. You also need partnerships. Finally, you need finance, both domestic and from abroad. Now, this is kind of the framework of the SPI. And we create 51 indicators. We compile them, and this is from a variety of our partners, starting from OECD, Paris 21, Open Data Watch, ILO, FAO, and so on. And again, this is publicly available data and open code. Now, the 51 indicators belong to 22 dimensions, 5 pillars, and they can also be aggregated up to an overall score and or an index. And this index can, of course, be broken up into components to see where a country leads and where it lags. So this is kind of a global map of how the world looks, but this is broken up into quintiles, top quintile to bottom quintile. I urge you to take a look at these at the SPI website. We also have a GitHub repository. Again, it is open data, open code. And while we propose a framework and the indicators and a score, we also allow users to set their own weights and explore this based on their country priorities. So I urge you to check it out and explore. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Umar. This is really exciting. You have highlighted the key pillars of the SPI. And of course, this comes with challenges going forward, of course. And actually, this is connecting me to the next speaker, my colleague, Julia Smith. Julia is a policy analyst at the OECD Paris 21. And she has been focusing on capacity development of statistical systems in low and middle income countries. And Julia has been involved in the measurement of these development capacities. Julia, I know you have been involved also in the SPI development together with Umar. Can you please share your experience and ideas on what are the key challenges measuring statistical capacity in the national statistical systems, but also how can statistical capacity indicators be used to prepare the national statistical systems for new data challenges? You have the floor.
Thank you, Philippe. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I think the question that you asked me captures very well how I used to work at Paris 21 now these past 2 years. where I had the pleasure to put on two hats, right? So to see the world as a statistician and as a policy analyst at the same time. So as a statistician, we would ask, how do we measure reality? How do we capture the actual performance in statistical systems, as Uma has described? And at the same time, we want to answer the question as a policy analyst, how do we incentivize policy change with these indicators? And I would like to share some experiences and lessons learned with all of you from that. I believe that there are great challenges with measuring statistical performance, and these are also chances. And I think, Umar, we agree that the SPI is a breakthrough in assessing the performance of NSS. But we also agree that, as everyone who has tried to measure institutional performance of some sort, there are those challenges. And the first one is that every country has different institutional capacities. What is effective as a, for example, as a coordination mechanism in one statistical system might not be so the case in another one. And there's always a trade-off in measuring broad, so measuring mechanisms or performance or some aspect of capacity across countries versus measuring deep, so very clearly capturing a specific statistical capability. And I cannot tell you how much effort goes into just creating a simple indicator, and Uma has created a lot of them. So that's amazing. The second challenge is that indicators need to capture change. And I think we have seen that when we listen to Stefan and Mercy, it's great to have an indicator that measures the frequency of a census. But we see that the data ecosystem moves away from a data collection focus, and this needs to be changing too. So indicators need to capture, for example, that censuses and the way they are conducted change. And the third challenge is that indicators are never holistic. So they always measure pieces of reality, and they can be useful guidance, but we know they have blind spots. And one index, for example, can tell you whether a country has a good statistical system. It gives you a number. But if we want to pursue change, I think we also need to know which particular area requires support. And the new framework and the new idea of how we all think about capacity development allows that. So that does not only refer to the SPI, but also to the CD 4.0 framework that Sasha has been mentioning in the beginning, the Paris 21 framework. So moving forward, I think what we should measure in the future is what I think the statistical community needs is focus on what we want to measure in capacity development, because this is where we want to make a future. And Paris 21 has been working on that using the CD 4.0 framework, which was a holistic framework attempting to measure statistical capacity on a system, on an organizational, and on an individual level. But I think now is the time to say, okay, we have looked at it holistically. Now we identify the leverage points. And I think it crystallized already very clearly from the dialogue that we had now that there is a big need to measure data use. And we need to measure that, as Stefan has pointed out, not only how data, privately held data, is managed in the public sector, but also how policymakers use those statistics, how the private sector might be driven by data, and how this is also used in the civil society, as Umar has shown in the framework. And it's very difficult to measure that concept, and we are delighted to embark on this adventure with the World Bank at Paris 21. The second aspect that I personally think is very critical to dive into is the quality of legal frameworks and regulations. These are enablers, like the legal framework can really be decisive in how in framing or shaping the way how data is shared within the national statistical system across different sectoral entities. And this is really the future, like what are the privacy constraints, who can store data. This is the quality of the legal framework that counts. And then finally, I think we need to go into skills. And this is exactly what Mercy mentioned, not only technical skills such as data management, new analysis methods like geospatial data or big data methods, but also the soft skills. Because if we move to data stewards, then it's very important that we have good statisticians that can manage also external relationships. Ultimately, I think if we want to abstract it a bit, maybe in the future we will go away from measuring outputs and we will start measuring data flows between government entities and how fast and quick they flow between different institutions and what the volume is. And maybe that's what we will look into in the future in 10 years when we move really thoroughly to a modern data ecosystem. So my final point is to bridge to the change and how we incentivize this change and how we accelerate capacity development in those areas that really make a difference. We know that real change will come only with right incentives and by leaving the ownership to the partners that drive those agendas. And this is, I think, clear, or for me, it's clear that measurement is just one step. And if it wants to be conducive to change, if those indicators want to be useful, then only if they are validated by country partners, but also by other partners, if the methodology can be improved jointly, to really give ownership to those methods, to be transparent and to have a dialogue around how to boost performance in the statistical system. This is critical, these 3 points. And for that, I think we need a long-term vision. We need a strategy for scaling. And I leave it here. I think I hand over to Mitch, who already said he has ideas on how this could be achieved. And thank you very much for the discussion. Back to you, Philippe.
Thank you very much, Julia, for these insightful thoughts on the capacity development measurement challenges and the way forward to increase or capture new areas. And your conclusion is very important indeed, and is linking to the long-term vision and strategies. And I would like to invite Michel Blaza to reflect on these strategies. And Michel is actually the Regional Director for Data, Innovation and Civic Technology at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Michel is working to foster sustainable development through digital transformation in low and income countries. Michel, you have listened to Mercy, Stefan, Umar, and Julia, and actually the interventions are leading to how can we have long-term strategies to make the capacity development sustainable. My question now is, as somebody working for Millennium Challenge Corporation and working with national statistical systems, how to build long-term strategies for sustainable capacity development in the national statistical systems? Over to you, Mitch.
Philippe, thank you. That's a very kind introduction. It's great to be on such a distinguished panel, and it's good to see everyone. As Philippe said, for the last 6 years, through a partnership between 2 US government agencies, the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the President's Emerging Plan for AIDS Relief, our team at MCC has been working on the development of data ecosystems and considering sustainability over the long term. This, of course, includes a strong focus on data skills, which our partner organizations in country have developed amongst thousands of individuals and organizations in both Tanzania and Cote d'Ivoire. We're now expanding to additional countries through greater involvement in MCC. And our work at MCC is rooted in a deep commitment to data and to country ownership. We use data to select the countries that we work with. And so I was listening with key interest to Umar's discussion of statistical performance. And then we use data to choose the investments that will unlock economic growth in those countries. We do all this in response to priorities and projects that are proposed by our partner countries. And we value very highly country ownership as part of that. Yesterday, I moderated a roundtable on data partnerships in the Global South, which was a fascinating discussion. And it raised a number of important issues, but perhaps most importantly, the issue of the South, the Global South, taking the lead in managing and using its own development data and developing long-term capacities to do so. Taking the long view requires that we remember why we're building data capacities, making our world more equitable, a little less harsh, and a better place for all of us to live. It is important to build robust national statistical offices, of course, and systems to produce quality data. But it is at least as important to give citizens the data access and capabilities to participate fully in defining and driving national development priorities. Building capacity broadly and continuously is essential for long-term development success. A critical aspect of our current work is making use of methodologies to better understand country data ecosystems. So I'm very pleased to hear the discussions of capacity measurement by Julia and Umar, particularly this idea that Julia advanced of measuring data flows, which I have an interest in seeing. Our team takes a systems view, researching strengths and weaknesses of a particular country to focus on ways to strengthen data systems holistically. Our goal is to catalyze the type of dynamic, evolving and innovative country data ecosystem that can disrupt business as usual and guide country-led development. Public-private partnerships to sustain capacity development and diversify funding is something that will lead to democratizing the availability and use of data. Tanzania Data Lab, as an example, was established with international funding, but is now sustained by private sector and foundation funds. And it's now influencing national policies on the use of non-traditional data, geospatial data, expanding its groundbreaking subnational reach, and teaching data skills and entrepreneurship to young women. Traditional capacity and statistical development involves training by external experts and development projects that work around in-country systems in order to extract the data. But one thing we've learned from the pandemic is that these approaches are fragile and too dependent on external funding and expertise. Resilience emerges from country-based and community-based organizations, universities, and businesses, which have the data capacities to address local problems. When we have provided small enabling investments to local innovators in Cote d'Ivoire and Tanzania to make use of open data sets, they find culturally sensitive ways to make the data accessible and useful. Data strategies are, first and foremost, dependent on having data skills. And these are most effective as close to the intended users as possible, where the incentive to use data is driven by real-life decisions. Data-driven decision-making is important for national and international dialogues, of course, but is most critical at subnational levels, where data democratization brings the real value of data to citizens. Sustainable data investments are important only so long as they are useful, and so data is tied directly to development. Transparency, accountability, reliability, all of these begin with capacities. A population that does not have the capacity to analyze and interpret data on its own is readily led down the wrong path. Trust must be built in statistical systems, and this depends on local ownership, starting with the sharing of information and building capacities in diverse populations. This includes women and other underserved populations. In the data use training programs that our partners provide, we've exceeded 50% female participation by insisting that this is prioritized. In closing, let me just say, Philippe, and I'll turn it back to you. Reliable and trustworthy statistics are a starting point as a way to traverse uncertain paths and inform development goals, and to build trust in decisions. Sustainable development driven by data depends on building trust and diversity, and it begins with making capacities available broadly over the long term.
Thank you very much, Mitch. This is really very useful, very interesting. We don't have enough time to comment on this. I will just hand over to my colleague, Liliana, for the question and answers session. And I hope we will have more discussions in this session. So over to you, Liliana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thanks to all speakers for really leaving us with great ideas about the measurement, but also about what works in capacity development. I just have one quick question, maybe to make a full circle to the country again. And Mercy, I would like to ask you specifically, we heard a lot about partnerships and about country ownership. So I wanted to hear from you on what coordination mechanisms are actually enabling this kind of partnership building in the national statistical system through your experience. Can you maybe highlight something that really worked in Malawi, in terms of leveraging partnerships for capacity development?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. In Malawi, let me start by saying that National Statistical Office appoints officers, statisticians on a secondment to ministries. But we do have a National Statistical System Steering Committee, which meets and has been meeting every quarter, where reports from various sectors are presented with highlighting the challenges, and then we discuss the challenges. So what happens is every quarter we meet, reports are shared, and the plans for the next quarter are also shared, and then the National Statistical Office follows up on those. And the emphasis there is not on regular reports, regular reporting mechanism. It's really the initiatives which are being implemented, big surveys which are being implemented, big activities of developmental nature are shared, and then we discuss those, and NSO follows up on the same. We've been meeting every quarter since, and I've noted that this has actually been very useful a coordination modality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercy, for highlighting this role of regular dialogue and exchange among stakeholders in the national statistical system. So with this, I would like to hand over to Johannes, who is in Bern, to kindly embrace all the points that were raised during the session and close it. Thank you so much. Over to you, Johannes.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Thank you very much for all colleagues who have been joining us here. It's still early morning in Bern. It's great. In terms of measuring success, I see the room has doubled in size of participants while we were talking, so apparently it hasn't been too boring. And thanks all to those who joined online and virtually at this time. Now, you said I should summarize all the interesting points that have been made, and then we would be staying here probably for one more hour. But then I was told we have to finish in time, so I think I keep it rather a bit short. And what I'm trying to do is, for me personally, what are the 3 things that I personally take away? And let me reflect on 3 points. The first is COVID-19 as a breaking point for thinking about capacity development. A second point I will talk a bit about is capacity development as a changing concept. We need to unpack capacity development and make it fit to a changing data landscape. And the third point, I want to just share a few thoughts about the leverage points that I took away, the title of this session. So if you allow me, to some extent it was part of the conversation so far, but I think COVID-19, with the imposing of lockdowns, has fundamentally changed how we should think about capacity development. And let me simplify here a little bit between an old model and a new model that we are hopefully going to. The old model, and I can say this because we are Paris 21, we are very much in capacity development, and I'm stylizing here a bit. The old model was we go embark on a plane, we travel to countries, we do workshops, the expert is coming from the West, and then we teach our clients to some extent. Of course, I'm making it up, it's not happening in this way, but to some extent there was a lot of truth in this, that there was a little bit, as the question that yesterday was asked in the plenary, what about supply-led, sort of supply-driven capacity development? So in that sense, that was no longer possible because the planes were no longer leaving the airports. So in that sense, many statistical offices in the Global South had to rethink about how can they strengthen their capacities at that very time with all these challenges about IT that Mercy was mentioning. So I think the topic that also Mitch brought up, resilience, and how do we deliver capacity is changing quite a lot. And I think we should definitely assess of what are the lessons learned for COVID-19 and how can we strengthen capacities about the way how to do it in terms of strengthening the ability to mobilize own resources, as Mercy has said, in this changing context. So Again, COVID-19 as an important break changer for thinking about capacity development, and I do believe there are really still important lessons to be learned. The second point I wanted to make is, and that has been brought up, is the need for capacity development to change, to unpack capacity development and to adjust capacity development to a changing data landscape. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, capacity development for statisticians meant to be good in SPSS, to be good in regression analysis, to compile the data, surveys, and those kind of things. I think this has completely changed, right? I mean, as chief statistician, senior management, they have to do so many things that are completely driven and away from what has been taught and what kind of capacities that were needed just 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. So the three things I heard here was very much brought forward by Stefan. Data stewardship, to be the data stewardship. How can we transform statistical office? What kind of capacities are needed that they can become a data steward? So that's one important thing. The second is data use. The whole training of a new field of training other actors in this data ecosystems. So civil society organizations are producing increasingly also data. Are there quality frameworks so we can help them that their data can be assessed? So there's lots of new business to come for statistical offices, strengthening capacities, in particular for data use, and I'm very happy that the World Bank's new SPI is strengthening so much the data use component. And last but not least, statisticians are very good in measuring everything and anything on this earth, but they're not very good at measuring their own performance. So we need to get better at that. I mean, I think we have the World Bank's SPI, and we need definitely this is a good start, but I think we need to also be humble. Sometimes I get questions from policymakers or from aid agencies. Yeah, Johannes, tell me, I mean, you have been working as Paris 21, let's say in a given country, let's say Malawi, for 10 years now. So how can you prove with data that your work was successful? How is success? How do you measure success in capacity development? Mongolia, the same. So I think we have to push this further. It's very important to have very, very complex indicators and indices. We also need to learn in an easy way to communicate those to those who make decisions also about funding. And let me come to the last point, now the leverage point. What are the leverage points? As we have seen, capacity embraces many different points. And I do think Julia, in her intervention, made a very important point about incentives. At the end of the day, we are not building capacity for the sake of building capacity. The whole idea is to produce data that changes lives for people for the better. Better data for better policies for better lives, right? I mean, this is a little bit the OECD's mantra, and I think we can relate to this. So in that sense, what are the key leverage points that we can see? I mean, the incentives, providing incentives, and here again, Mercy said, I mean, we have to convince national policymakers that this is a good thing, to have good data. If they are not convinced to have good data to use for assessing their own policies because they are afraid that those data might show things that they didn't want to see because of their performance, why would they invest in this? Why would they build capacity? So really, let's be more political economy, as economists would say. Let's look more at the incentives and how we can change those. A second point here is, which is the topic of the day. It's a bit boring, perhaps. At least I don't find it too exciting per se, but I think many of you may be finding it exciting, is the legal frameworks, is statistical legislation, which is so crucial now everywhere in this world about data sharing, interoperability, and this conflict between data utopia and data dystopia. I think that the crucial thing will be data sharing. Do we go for a world where data is used for a public good, or do we go for an Orwellian state where the state watches us, where big companies drive our behavior through manipulating algorithms? I think the critical thing here will be also on the legal field, and statistical legislation will be very important. And last but not least is the skills. It's the skills question. I think we have to look into this very, very carefully. What are the data science skills? What are the skills that we need to develop capacity as we go forward? So with this, I think we have an exciting agenda ahead of us. Capacity development, I think, is a crucial issue underpinning all our activities as statisticians, as people interested in data science. So I really appreciate you being here. And I see we are wonderful in time, Sasha. I never expected this. Just 1 minute to say thank you to everybody. So let me do this. So first of all, a big thanks to all the people, the presenters, who have taken their time, and in particular to the colleagues like Stefan and Umar. I mean, it must be 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the US now. Something very, very early in the morning, so definitely a big thanks to all the speakers. A big thanks for all of you to come at this time to this session and following us. A big thanks to my colleague from Paris 21 to put this session together. And a big thanks to all the technicians. We are still learning, we are still building our capacities, working with this hybrid, and I understand that there are 5, 6 people for the Zoom, for the camera, for the mics, and I really, I'm so happy that this is working so well this morning. So please join me all, give a clap of hands to all the colleagues here in the room and all the colleagues that are in this virtual forum. A wonderful session. I think we are off for a good start. So now we end at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you very much.